One of the questions that I've been wanting to ask you the most is a conversation that I've sort of had over the course of some of these previous episodes and whatnot. When I studied down in New Orleans, I had a couple of really great drum teachers, and then fast forward to more recently with the internet, YouTube, and every sort of fascination with, I think maybe could stem back to the Guitar Center drum offs and that being sort of an outlet for kids, and sort of the vocabulary that I think came from maybe like the church and into that place, and then via YouTube and via Instagram and social media in general, with the sort of fireworks nature of it, it's become quite a point of interest and a more common vocabulary. So I'm just kind of curious sort of what you tied that back to, because I remember the first time I heard anything sort of like that. And again, whether you call it gospel chops or 30-second note, patterns over the course of sort of halftime grooves, and just trading licks and some of the stuff that again kind of came out of the church from what I've heard. A lot of people seem to reference Vinnie Colaiuta. So I was curious from your perspective, especially as a teacher and at a place like Berklee, no less, what do you attribute some of that vocabulary to? Is there any particular person? Because I know in the case of, for instance, like Steve Smith and Vinny himself, they both studied with who you had mentioned, I believe, Gary Chafee. So does it tie back to Gary Chafee? And what do you sort of give that lineage to?
That's a good question, man. I don't know that I could comment on Chafee so much, so much as I could comment on Vinny.
Sure.
You can listen to Vinny and you say, okay, that's Vinny. You don't know really what coming out of Vinny is stuff that he, directly got from Chafee, how
Sure.
he was influenced conceptually
Uh-huh.
by Chafee's concepts, I should say. But my take on it is chops have always been a fascination.
Sure.
Right? I mean, Buddy Rich, still people will. I still like to go watch Buddy Rich solos
Absolutely.
from time to time. It's just unfrickin' believable.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So, there's been this long-standing fascination. It's just it has shifted. It's become, I suppose you could say, it's become more of a focal point in the eyes of in the consciousness of our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say it probably comes from Gad, Vinny, Dennis Weckl.
Uh-huh.
You know that Buddy Rich Memorial Scholarship video, right, with the three, Weckl and Gad and Vinny.
Of course.
Right, and I think that if you put Dennis on that stage, like it would have been, he would have fit right in.
Totally.
They had a sound that was different. It
Mm-hmm.
was more contemporary when it came out. It was very, especially Weckles was extremely clean and pristine.
Mm-hmm.
There was just a beautiful component to just sonically speaking. It just sounded so good.
Mm-hmm.
And Gad, he had a little bit of that raw, dirty, not pretty sound.
Absolutely.
But there was also this definition to the sound. It was like a short sound, a thuddy sound.
Oh, his drum sounded borderline crazy. It's hilarious when I listen back to it. I'm like, Jesus, Gad, are you playing cardboard on top of those toms? What is going on here, dude? Jesus.
Yeah, but check this out. So, when you start playing like 30-second notes around toms that are headed and tuned as such,
Uh-huh.
that vocabulary takes on a different persona, almost like there's a different texture
Mm-hmm.
to it. It's a little more defined than, say, like an open black dot, sound on
Mm-hmm.
both sides, like Tony did, or
Right.
ambassadors on both sides and wide open. It's a different sound, and it became all the rage, man, in the mid '80s, and I think you got a large demographic of young African American drummers
Mm-hmm.
who were started to put their own spin on that Gad, Vinny, Dennis, Weckl kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
With that same sort of sound. You still hear that like sort of pristine, like doo 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 doo.
Uh-huh.
That kind of sound. You still hear that in a lot of the gospel, for lack of a better term, the drummers who do, gospel chops, so to speak.
Right.
It's that same sound. There are contemporary drummers who are playing a lot of notes, again, for lack of a better term,
Sure.
with a different sound.
Mm-hmm.
Even like a guy like Nate Smith, like his
Sure.
sound, little, not so doo doo doo, not so much that, a little more raw,
Mm-hmm.
a little uglier, that Ludwig sound.
Yeah, I think y'all both, not just because y'all both play Ludwigs, but I think y'all both have tonally, like more, what would maybe be more tied into maybe someone like, Mike Clark probably tuned it up a little bit high, but more of that sort of jazz funk kind of tonal tuning as opposed to something else maybe.
Exactly. So, we do have these guys like a Mark Juliana,
Sure.
Nate Wood.
Oh, yeah.
All these guys who can play a lot of notes and do at times with a decidedly different sound than that other sound we're talking about. And I think, like I said, I would attribute it largely to Black culture in America,
Mm-hmm.
putting their spin on what was the sort of contemporary way of playing, a lot of chops.
Right.
I.e., those cats.
Mm-hmm.
You hear a lot of them mention Vinny and Weckl,
Yes.
Yeah. And Gad.
And Dennis, for sure.
And Dennis, for that matter, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that speaks a lot to the reality of it. And, Jim Keltner said to Porcaro, when people were getting on Porcaro's ass about playing too many notes, he said something like, you know what, man, you just play it. Play those notes. If that's what you hear,
right,
play it. This is the time to do it. Maybe someday you won't hear all those notes. You won't want to play all those notes.
Yeah.
I try to keep that in mind when I'm thinking about this and when I'm teaching and advising students, and even for myself, just keeping it in mind for myself.
Mm-hmm.
Chops aren't, inherently bad.
Right.
It comes down to taste and, where you choose to speak in an overly verbose manner.
Yeah.
And, I think where the gospel chops gets a bad rap, and maybe to some degree, deservedly so, what people do with it, how much value people put on it, and how much time it takes to get the skill set to be able to play like a Thomas Pridgeon.
Right.
That shit takes time. You got to put hours in, unless, even if you do come out of the womb with a great gift to play drums, which I'm sure Thomas did, because he was playing his ass off at a very young age.
I know, it's crazy.
You still got to work at it.
Right.
And some people have to work at it a lot more so than others. That shit takes time.
Yeah.
So it's like you got to be careful because there's so much other shit to work on that is more important.
Right.
That's the thing.
Right.
So if you're a young drummer and you're just working on your chops because you just want to have the most chops, it's like, somebody who's just a greedy money hoarder who just their purpose in life is to just make a lot of money. If your purpose in life is to just play a lot of notes and that's it, well then you're going down the wrong path unless you just are going to make videos in your studio by yourself for the rest of your life.
Right.
And that is another component to this is
Absolutely.
the culture of just people playing by themselves, making records by themselves, even if they're making records with other people. They're still doing it in isolation and long before COVID-19.
Right.
So that's a different thing too, man. It's like back in the day, these people are on stage like Sammy Davis Jr. I watched a video recently of Sammy playing with a small band, like a small big band. There were horns and such, but it wasn't I don't think it was a full-on big band, if I remember correctly. Acoustic piano, no mics on anything. There were probably a couple of overhead mics hanging from, the rafters or however they did it, hanging overhead out of sight of the camera. You must have had to listen like a mofo to lock in, especially a big band. If you're a horn player on one side of the stage and you're a piano player on the other, and by the way, this ensemble, they were on top of each other. They were set up right on top of each other, which makes sense. They had to hear each other. Mm-hmm. So, as a musician coming up in that era, you had to develop that skill to be able to play in a manner where you could hear everything.
Absolutely.
Without it being turned up in your monitor, because there was no monitor, or your in-ear monitor, because there was no in-ear monitor. You had to listen, so you had to develop a touch. You had to develop that skill set. So younger drummers, I think, are in danger of not ever seeing the need to develop that skill set. Mm-hmm. And maybe danger is too dramatic. My point is, if you're a young drummer, you learn to play a room. If you want to be a versatile drummer, learn to play a room. I struggled with that very much so when I was younger, because, like I said, my MO was to hit really hard, and you can't just do that every day and then have a gig where you can't do it and just say, oh, well, I can't do it. Okay, I'll play quietly.
Right.
That was extremely difficult for me to play quietly when I first started to have to play quietly.
Yeah.
So that's another component to this whole modern thing that's going on. You don't want to be a drummer who's just working on your chops night and day and playing as loud as you frickin' can by yourself, because it doesn't matter, because you don't have to listen to anybody. Or you can turn your play along track up really loud in your in-ears and just beat the shit out of your drums.
Right.
To me, I grew up where that would not be considered a real world skill.
Yeah. Right.
Now it's a little more of a real world skill because it's more part of the real world.
Yeah.
But, so where do you want to draw that line?
I know.
I think young drummers should be thinking about that.